Good morning, good morning, good morning to you all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning in the LearnBox Lounge. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And what a treat we've got for you today. We've got the amazing James Burke, who is just waiting to come on. He is so infectiously positive that you are going to have a great morning. Just to give you a bit of an overview before we start, the LearnBox Lounge is something that we started right at the start of lockdown to allow people to have a break from constant back-to-back meetings, homeschooling, everything like that. So you could have some time just to sit, grab yourself a tea or a coffee and listen to somebody that was going to inspire you. And we haven't failed to disappoint with the speakers that we've had, and today is no different. James will be here soon and I'm sure you're going to thoroughly enjoy it. The lounge is from 10:30 till 11:30. Soon I'll hand over to James and he's going to tell you his story, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask him some questions. So if you want to ask questions at any point, if you see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, just type your questions in there and I'll pose them to James at the end of his session. So yeah, we've got an hour this morning. Q&A is there, but before I hand over to James, I think it's important that we, from the feedback that you've given us, which has been great, thank you very much, and we will ask for feedback again today. So at the end of the session, you will have a feedback form in your inbox waiting for you. But the feedback we've had so far, a few people have mentioned that they don't know very much about LearnBox. So yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to get on my LearnBox soapbox. It's my favourite place to be. So just to give you a little overview on LearnBox, what we do and what we're about. We create content, we create the best learning content in the sector, and that's it in a nutshell. We create content, we can create any sort of educational pieces. If we're not the experts, we'll find people that are, or we'll utilise your expertise and we'll bring that to life in the most engaging way. So that's what we do, but actually what's more important than that is the reason why we do it. The late great Nelson Mandela said education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world, and at LearnBox we 100% agree with that, but we also believe that if that's coupled with the right technology, that can allow us to change the world much quicker, and with the rate of technological change, that is something that is so necessary. So that's what we're about, and every single person in the LearnBox team lives and breathes that and wants to create the very best content and put it on the best learning platforms, including our own, to make sure that that gets to you in the best possible way. So that's what we're about, and we'll also give you the opportunity when we drop you an email afterwards to have a discovery call with us. If you want some help creating your content or your digital strategy, we'll send you an email and please get in touch. We'll have a discovery call with you and work out how we can offer a solution to you to help you have the very best content and the most engaging pieces to support your learners. So yes, I'll get back off the LearnBox soapbox because I know the real reason you're all here is to hear the amazing James Burke. So James, if you'd like to come in, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Hi Lucy. Hello
Good
everybody.
morning. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thanks. You?
Yes, I like your strategically placed books in the background. I have my own here that I'm sure we'll come on to talk about later on. One of the best books I've read this year. Massive statement because I've read some great books. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for joining us today. You have given your time freely to us to allow everybody that's here a break from their day-to-day life and to help inspire them. I'm not going to go too much into your story, I'm going to let you do that, but I know right at the within there anyway, at some point near the start, you were homeless at some point and you're in a very, very different place today. So if nothing else than that, I hope people take that today, that actually you can be at the very, very rock bottom and it can completely change your life, all through your mindset and the language you use. So without further ado, I will leave you to it. And thank you once again.
You're very welcome and thank you for having me. It's a great point actually. I think the number one thing I always ask people to take away anytime I'm speaking at an event or webinar, which has been the case more recently, is thoughts become things. So we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through. I'll start with my story, my upbringing. So I grew up in Manchester, just outside of Salford on quite a rough council estate. I've got 7 sisters and a brother. Now, my brother's the smart one because he's the oldest of us actually. And he moved away. So he moved away to Germany. He got away from the girls, as far away from the girls as possible when I was still really young actually. So I was pretty much the only brother, the only boy out of all the siblings. So a lot of a lot of expectation, a lot of sorting out boy kind of problems, all that kind of thing. And we lived in a really small house, actually. So there was 9 of us in total, the 7 sisters, me and my mum. And later that would be my stepdad as well. So there was a lot of us in a really small house. We lived in a small council house. So at one point, the most of us that were in a bedroom was 5. 5 was in a bedroom, 2 bunk beds on either side and a mattress across the floor. So we grew up, we had a lot of fun. My childhood up until hitting high school really was a lot of fun. We kind of lived and that environment that you expect really in that situation where we're just, it's always fun and games. It's very noisy. There's always something going on. But we just typical, I think, really to pre-millennial kind of growing up. There was a lot of outdoor activities. We was always on the field, whether it was playing football, climbing trees, making rope swings, all that kind of fun stuff. So there was no real trauma there, other than the fact that we didn't have a lot of money, but we never kind of starved or anything like that. It just wasn't much money to go around, especially between so many of us. So the typical kind of stuff that you see in council estates, hand-me-down clothes, all that kind of thing. Shoes with holes in them, trainers with holes in them. So now, when I started high school, things started to change a little bit. I started boxing at the age of 12. So I didn't have a fantastic inspirational story about starting boxing, at least. You've kind of got the Muhammad Ali story. Someone stole his bike when he was 13. So we went to the local police officer who said, and he said to the local police officer, when I catch this guy who stole my bike, I'm going to give him a whooping. So the police officer took him to the boxing club. Mike Tyson, another great story. He was arrested 38 times by the time he was 13, and the police officer that kept arresting him took him to his boxing club and introduced him to his coach and lifelong friend, Customato. So they had these really cool stories. My story why I started boxing was the gym opened up at the back of my house. So the gym opened up literally around the corner. So it wasn't quite as sexy as Ali and Tyson's story, but I fell in love with it just like those guys did. Second I walked in the gym, the smell, the leather, the sweat dripping off the bags, absolutely fell in love with it. And I really dedicated to it actually from really early on. I wasn't the most naturally talented. So there was probably about 10 or 15 of us who all started at the same time. 7 or 8 of those we were all friends. So we kind of all, did what young lads do. We all went together. And I was probably somewhere in the middle. I certainly wasn't the best out of those 10 or 15 that started at the same time as the gym opened, but I wasn't the worst either. I was somewhere in the middle. One thing that I did have was a love for it, which I suppose brings us right back. Lucy, you mentioned this right at the top of the program, your why. When you love something, when you know why you're doing it. And by the way, that doesn't have to be this mysterious, esoterical thing. I think Simon Sinek is a big fan of Start With Why. His book's called Start With Why. And he talks about the golden circle. But it doesn't have to be this mysterious search. It can be something really simple. Why do you do what you do? Because it makes my family happy. Great. That's a great why. In fact, that's a really powerful why. And the same thing was true for me. I really loved boxing. I really enjoyed it. So it made me do it more. It made me train harder. And even from a young age, I had this vision of becoming a world champion, watching my role models, people that I loved. Muhammad Ali was always my hero. Watching him and how he'd changed the world was a really big inspiration for me. And I always thought, well, at least I can change my mum's life. At least I can change my parents' life and get them out of this council estate. So I trained really hard, and slowly I started to overtake some of the lads that had started at the same time. And I started becoming one of the better lads out of the bunch that had started at that time, although there were some really good lads in the gym at the time, a lot of national champions in the gym at the time, and a few role models. One in particular was called Baz. Baz Bybee was one of my big role models. He'd boxed really well, and he was a little bit older. Everyone really looked up to him. So I started to overtake. I started to have my first fights. I won my first 7 fights, which is quite rare in amateur boxing. A 50-50 is a decent record in amateur boxing because you're matched evenly all the way through. So I won my first 7 fights, started to do really well. And then, I was in high school at the same time. Now, at the age of about 13 or 14, my ego kicked in, which is normally the case for most teenagers. My ego kicked in at age 13 or 14. And I started practicing what I was doing in the gym out of the gym as well. I started to get into a little bit of trouble, at school as well. Just typical stuff, being a bit leery, having a bit of an attitude, wagging it, and just all this kind of stuff that young daft lads from council estates typically do. And then when I hit 16, I took it up a notch. That ego had grown and grown. I was boxing for England at that point. So my ego was just through the roof. I was still absolutely in love with boxing. And I was still probably doing it for the right reasons deep down. But there was also a lot of in me that loved the attention, that loved the... basically, anyone said my name and it was, yeah, the boxer. I know James Burke, he's the boxer, right? So at that age, 16, I was boxing at a really high level, boxed some of the best lads in Europe at the time. And then I got kicked out of school. So I got in that much trouble at school, the ego took over and I got kicked out of school at the age of 16. So that started to cause some problems, started to cause problems at home. And again, I was carrying that attitude back into the family home with me. Now, my mum's a lot of things, tolerant isn't one of them. So I was kicked out of the family home as well at 16. Now, at first, truth be told, I saw it as a bit of an adventure. I thought I was pretty cool that I'd been kicked out. Again, just painting the picture of that 16-year-old cocky council estate lad. And then once I'd run out of sofas to sleep on, so as you can imagine, 16 years old, I had a lot of friends who was like, come and sleep at my house, that would be cool. They were all for it, but their parents, obviously, was all living with the parents at the time. Their parents were less accommodating, rightfully so, because I was an absolute pain in the neck. And, you know, a couple of friends let me stay with them for a while, but they did get to a point where I ran out of sofas. One of my friends who was a year or two older, he was maybe 17, 18, he had his own place, so I went to stay with him. Now, his girlfriend was pregnant, and the deal was that, you know, as she goes into labour, I needed to leave so they could have the first family home with the new baby. So the night that she gave birth to Jack, who's my godson, funnily enough, was my first night sleeping homeless. And I just basically ran out of couches. I'll never forget the night, other than it's Jack's birthday. It was absolutely hammering it down with rain. So it was the middle of June. It was the beginning of July, but typical British summer. It was absolutely hammering it down. And I was just desperate to get some shelter at first. That was my first thought. Let's go and get some shelter. So there's an old and abandoned house that was not too far from where I was staying with my friend, just a couple of streets away. So I knew that house was abandoned. So first I tried to get in. I couldn't get in. They had metal shutters on and that kind of thing. And then I noticed they had an outdoor toilet. So I tucked up in there just for a bit of shelter at first. The rain did not stop. And I ran out of ideas. So I was going through my phone at the time, seeing who I could call. The only possessions that I had in the world at that point were in my backpack. I literally just had a bag with some clothes in it, some deodorant and some toothpaste. And they were the only possessions I had in the world. They were all drenched now because it had been raining that hard. And I literally just tucked up in this outdoor toilet. I couldn't get through to anyone to see if I could stay on their couch. And as day turned to night, I started realizing this is where I'm going to be sleeping tonight. So that was my first night sleeping rough. I was shivering. It was absolutely freezing. I still hate the cold now. So I'm still really not a big fan of the cold. And I think it comes back from those nights sleeping rough where it was just blisteringly cold and the cold never left me. So unfortunately, that kind of pattern continued. So there was that had been a few months into my journey of being kicked out of the family home. That kind of pattern continued really for the next 12 months of maybe I'd have a few weeks where one of my friend's parents was good enough to let me stay, but then something would pop up and I'd do a few weeks at a time, sleeping in parks and sleeping in outdoor toilets. For the first probably 7 or 8 months, I hid it from everybody. So my friends that knew I didn't have anywhere to live permanently, I hid it from everybody that I was kind of sleeping on parks and all that kind of stuff. Because again, I had this big ego and I didn't want people thinking that or feeling sorry for me. And then I had to let a couple of people know because it was getting to a point where I didn't know I was going to continue. So I let one or two of my closest friends know and they helped out where they could. And yeah, I thought I kind of hit rock bottom really. So it was a pretty tough time. Not long after that, I started speaking to someone from a organisation called Connections that I'm not even sure if they're still in existence really, but they work with young people to kind of teenagers really, young adolescents, to help them. And as soon as my case landed on the desk, they were a fantastic help. They put me up in a hostel in Wigan. So my first night in the hostel, so I didn't really know what to expect. It looked a bit like a prison, to be honest. I felt like I was in prison a little bit as well. We had to be in by certain times. We weren't allowed to have people over. We weren't allowed to have people stay over and that kind of stuff. So part of me was really thankful that I got my own place. And that was my own place, the first time I had my own place as well. So part of me was really thankful and grateful for that. But then part of me felt a little bit like I was in prison, although I would have preferred that to any more nights out in the cold. So my first night, I met a few of the occupants. They were less than friendly, let's put it that way. And I ended up fighting with one of them on my first night. So straight away, the hostel gave me my first and final warning. A few months later, ended up fighting with somebody else. Of course, at the time, none of this was my fault, right? So this is probably one of the biggest learnings that I've taken. At this point in my life, none of this was my fault. So the guy obviously started the fight. It wasn't me. And the second fight, same thing. They started the fight. It wasn't me. How could I react in any other way? My mum and my parents kicking me out. Obviously, that was all their fault. How selfish of them. How could they do that? Getting kicked out of school. Of course, it was the board of directors' fault. So this was kind of a repeat theme, really, in my mindset of blaming everyone else but me. And that's something that I talk a lot about now on our coaching programs is wherever there's blame, wherever there's excuse, wherever there's denial, it creates a lack of change. You can't really change anything until you take ownership of it and you take responsibility for your actions. So that would be my biggest message out there right now. Remember, everything in life is always a choice. You've always got a choice how you respond to things. So whenever something happens, whether it feels like it was out of your control, whether it feels like it was a little bit unfair at the time, it's always your choice how you respond. Thoughts become things. I repeat that over and over throughout today's session. And you can always just choose to look at things a different way. Didn't have that skill set back then, just to let you know. So that's something I've developed more recently. So I was kicked out of the hostel. So one of my sisters actually had moved to Leicester not long before, and she was the only sister that I was still speaking to out of the 7. And so I moved down to Leicester with her while I cleared my head. Throughout all that time, I'd been involved in some other ruckuses and some other arguments and fights and that kind of stuff. Got in trouble with some local gangsters. So at this point, my life was in a bit of a mess. I was kind of in trouble with these guys back home in Salford. I didn't ever have anywhere to stay. Didn't have a job, didn't know what the future looked like. And I'd been, since moving to Leicester, I wasn't able to get to the boxing club. So I'd been dropped from the England boxing squad as well. So I was a bit depressed, to be honest. Depression hit me at this point, but nowhere near as hard as it would do in the future. So I decided to regroup. I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. Again, if only I knew what was to come, I'd know what rock bottom really looked like. So I decided to regroup. Now, this is the thing about rock bottom. Rock bottom is a great place to build a foundation. So I decided to regroup. I got a job while I was in Leicester. I saved up some money and I wasn't paid very well either. I was a labourer for a window fitter. Hated that job. It really, really did suck. I also got a job as a window cleaner. Hated that even more. The cold, how window cleaners do their job, I have no idea. It's so cold, especially when the water's cold. So I got those couple of jobs, saved up enough money. About 6 months later, I moved back to Manchester. My first job was get back on the England squads. Second job was get a job. And the third was, find your own place. So I did all of those 3 things. I stayed with friends a couple of times. My friends were getting a little bit older now. I was closer to 18, 19. My friends were getting a little bit older. 1 or 2 of them had their own places. So I had a few more couches to sleep on. Got my own place, put the deposit down for my own place, a rental, a little apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment. And at that time, I met my first love as well. So I met I met the mother of my son now, Matthew. And she was a real good influence on me. She was very religious, actually. She'd come from a completely different background, a completely different world. She knew me from school. We went to the same school. I didn't know her too well, but she knew who I was. And she was a really good girl. So religious background, really good girl. Never had any trouble. I've been in trouble in her whole life. So we really started to settle down. She helped me plant my feet a little bit and stick at the jobs and that kind of stuff. So I couldn't get back onto the England squads. I lost in the national final. So generally, whoever wins in the national final gets picked for the squads. I lost in the national final. I was a little disappointed, but I decided to turn pro instead. So I had some pretty good interest, actually. I had interest from Ricky Hatton, who had just started up his promotions at the time. Frank Warren. So I decided to give it a go. I decided to go all in, and I thought, actually, this could be my big breakthrough. Maybe the Olympics wasn't the way to go, which was my original dream. Let's turn pro. Let's go and chase that world title that I'd always wanted. So that was my this was my comeback, right? I kind of built this up, right? This is how I go wrong. So at this point, I already had a bit of a story. It was already a 2-year struggle that I'd been through. I'd already been struggling for actually probably closer to 3 years. I was 19 by the time I had my pro debut. So I was still pretty young to box professionally. But I'd had 3 years of hardships, really. And then the pro debut came around. So at this point now, I've got a job. I've got a bit of cash in the bank for the first time in my life. Actually, I had a couple of thousand in the bank, which was more money than I ever thought would be possible to save up in my life. Literally didn't think at one point in my life I'd ever have that much money, full stop. So I had a couple of grand in the bank, and I mean a couple of grand, not tens of thousands. I'd got this job and I'd turned professional. So things were starting to look up. Sold a couple of 100 tickets for my pro debut. It was on a Frank Warren televised show. Liam Walsh boxed on that show. He headlined the show, so it was on a Sky Sports bill back when Frank Warren had Sky Sports contract before Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. And yeah, boxed on the bill. So it was a really big bill, really exciting. Couple of 100 fans there, a couple of 100 of my closest friends, family, and people that I knew. And the pro debut started. So I came out to my music, Carmina Burana or Fortuna, which is like the X Factor song, if you know that. If not, give it a YouTube afterwards. And came out. Remember seeing a couple of my friends absolutely screaming. One particular Mark, he was leaning over the barrier, absolutely screaming. That was the last image that I can remember before getting in the ring. So I got in the ring, first round, the bell goes for the first round. This is me in my element now. This is what I love most, that ring walk. Loved it. Loved that adrenaline. You know, when the announcers mentioned saying your name, absolutely loved it. The crowd roared, went crazy. It was absolutely brilliant. First round, seconds out, round one. Ding, ding, here we go. So I came out into the ring. I was jabbing, I was moving, hitting with a big right hand pretty early, actually, earlier than I thought, because usually a bit of feeling out process in the first minute. And his knees buckled. And yeah, jumped on him straight away, really energetic. He survived the first round. I sat down at the end of the first. And my coach was just saying, great job, James. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. Keep him behind that jab. And obviously, he's got a bit of a soft spot for that right hand, so keep throwing that. Second round came out, same thing, jabbing, moving, feeling pretty strong, feeling pretty comfortable. And then, so I threw a jab to the body. Now, for those of you that don't know boxing, when you throw a jab to the body, generally speaking, people come down with it. So it's just kind of like a eye contact thing, a body language thing. As you look down, people look down too. Same thing. So I threw this jab to the body, same shot for those of you that do like boxing. That Tommy Hearns knocked Roberto Duran out with, jab to the body, and then the right hand over the top, almost like a little bit of a trickery, a bit of a dummy. And it landed, and it was a good scoring shot. So I thought, right, okay, let's do that again. So I threw a few more jabs to the body on their arm, set up the DC, and then about halfway through the round, I tried the shot again, threw the jab to the body, and just as the right was coming up, he threw a big, wild overhand right that caught me clean. And straight away, I knew something was wrong. It didn't feel that. So usually when you're boxing, if there's anyone on the call that's boxed before, I'm sure you'll share this. I know you have, Lucy. When you actually get punched, do you know what? As daft as it sounds, doesn't hurt that much. It's just kind of like a big blink. Hurts more the next morning. But this hurt. This hurt really bad. It was like a seething pain. And I knew something was wrong. It was in my jaw. So I sat down at the end of the second round, and my coach went to take the gum shield out to give me some water, and I just turned my head away. I couldn't open my mouth. Literally couldn't open my mouth. So I knew something was really wrong. And he said, what are you playing at? You took a big shot there. So obviously it was visible to everybody else as well. Stay behind your jab. Keep throwing that right hand. Get your head back in the game. So went out for the third round, and all I could think about was this pain in my jaw and protecting it. So all I wanted to do is keep my hands up and protect it. So real survival instincts, I suppose. So I lost the third round. I'd lost the second. Now I'd lost the third as well. So it's only a 4-round fight in your professional debut. So at this point, I'm 2-1 down. Now I need the knockdown, a knockdown at least, to give me a 10-8 round to win the fight. So that's all that was going on in my mind. I have no idea what my coach said to me at the end of round 3. Absolutely no idea. I know he was shouting, but I have absolutely no idea what he said. Got up for round 4, and I'd love to tell you that this is the part of the story where round 4 went really well, got the knockdown and the win. Unfortunately, I didn't. Round 4 was the worst of my life. I lost the fight. I lost my debut. And to make matters worse, I lost my whole boxing career as well. I was diagnosed with osteoporosis on the back of them doing tests because my jaw was broken. I'd broken it again not long after. Once it had healed, a couple of weeks later, I broke it again pretty easily. I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, which is brittle bones. So that was the end of my boxing career. That was that. Now, that had been my identity. That had been the one thing that anybody and everybody knew me for. So that was a real hard blow to take. That put me in a bit of a crisis, an identity crisis. I just completely lost my identity. I lost my future that I'd just been working hard for the last 6 to 9 months to rebuild. And I was struggling. I was really struggling to come to terms with it. So I went back to my old amateur gym where my father figure, Henry, my old amateur boxing coach was. I just felt like I needed to see him. I just needed to speak to him. And while I was there, Baz, who I mentioned earlier, one of my role models, put his arm around me, and Baz said, "James, no matter what, you just keep fighting. This is what we do. We're fighters. You're stronger than this. Just keep going. I know it's tough. Just keep going." So I left the gym feeling a little bit better. Day after, I didn't feel any better. I felt like depression was kicking in. And then I got probably the worst news, or the most surprising news that I'd ever had in my life up to that point. I got a phone call from Henry, my old amateur coach, letting me know that Baz had died. And Baz had killed himself just 2 weeks after saying to me, "James, you've got to be strong. You've got to be a fighter." And all that was going through my head was, how much strength did that take? How much strength did that take to say that to me when he was feeling like he must have been feeling? So that knocked me for 6. My nan passed away 2 weeks later. So 2 weeks after that, my nan lost a battle with cancer. And that hit me hard as well. So at this point, I slipped right into depression. I was suffering from depression really bad, and suicide was creeping into my thoughts more and more. So I started to plan how I was gonna end things. I was gonna end my life, including sitting on the windowsill. This is the one image that comes back to me: sitting on the windowsill of my apartment, getting ready to jump. And it was that point. It was that point where I'd hit rock bottom, that I decided I needed to change. So again, rock bottom is a great place to build a foundation from. And all of these things, all these challenges that we go through, they build resilience. And at that point, I'd made that decision. So it was more, remember this is one big thing to remember. Hopefully some of you get this from the session today. Some of you might get this from the book. But wherever you get this feeling from, remember your life changes in a moment, just like that. It's literally the click of a finger when you make the decision to change. That is where your life changes. And that's where my life certainly changed. It was a decision that this wasn't good enough. Look at me. So at this point, I'd gone from 12 stone at fighting weight up to 17 stone. So I gained 5 stone. I just looked at myself. I thought, you are a mess. What has become of you? You went from being this superstar on the England boxing team to this kind of mess now. And I made that decision. So the first thing that I knew I had to do was figure out what my future looked like. And it's the same thing, guys. If you're ever struggling with depression, if you ever struggle. So this is the thing about depression. All depression is, I'm going to make it really simple so you can understand it. All depression is when you have a blueprint of what life should look like and your life isn't going like that blueprint. That's all that depression is. So the first thing to do when you've got depression is adjust the blueprint. Change the blueprint. Okay, now you need a new blueprint. So my boxing career was gone. What does the new blueprint look like? And I think the other big thing to take away from that is setbacks are only ever setbacks when you didn't expect them. So I didn't expect my boxing career to be ended. So I was just talking to Lucy before we went live this morning, and Lucy was talking about Tough Mudder. And, which is for those of you that don't know what that is, it's like a big fun run. You'd run 5 or 10K, something like that. It's quite long. And there's a lot of obstacles on the way, really fun obstacles, also really challenging obstacles. You're going to get filthy if you do it. Check it out on Google if you've not seen it, Tough Mudder. It's pretty cool. And when you hit those obstacles on Tough Mudder or on any obstacle course, they don't bother you. You just kind of get on with them. You get over the obstacle. If anything, you enjoy them, and then you carry on and you're moving towards your goal. That's all obstacles are. That's all. There's a big difference in how we, remember, thoughts become things, how we look at things. And that's always a choice. You can look at something as an obstacle, or you can look at it as a setback. When you look at it as a setback, that's a limiting belief. That's holding you back. when you look at it as an obstacle that's just in the way between you and your goal, it's just something you overcome. And once you've overcome it, you move forward. Same way as the race. So my biggest advice would be expect obstacles. So don't dwell on them. Dwelling on them is just going to create them and make them materialize quicker, but certainly expect them, because when you expect obstacles, when the obstacle comes, it's a lot easier to deal with. So for example, if you're a business owner and you've had to hire people, you brought people into your business where you're hiring people, that's great. Congratulations. Just expect the obstacle that one day you're going to have to fire people as well. So don't dwell on it. It's a 3 or 4 second thing. Just note it and move on. If you're in sales, okay, just be aware that you're going to get a few obstacles. You're going to get a few no's. You're going to lose a few clients. You're going to get a few pitches that get rejected. That's okay. As long as you prepare for the obstacle before, you're going to be just fine. So my new blueprint had started to materialize. I thought, right, I want to own my own business. That's what I saw as the way forward. And that's where I thought, right, I can achieve all my wildest dreams, these big ambitions that I've got through business now that I can't be a world champion boxer anymore. So this thing of world class had always been in my head. I'd always wanted to be world class at something. I thought if I run a world class business, that'll help me achieve my why, as Mr. Cynic would say. So first I had to decide what I wanted to do. And I knew I had to get a job first so I could decide what business I wanted to get into. And I'd always drove past the estate agents in my local town and always thought, that looks pretty cool. That would be pretty cool to do. Let me tell you, estate agency is not that cool. But anyway, I got the job answering the phone, not in the estate agency in my hometown, in an estate agency in Manchester City Centre. And I was basically just answering the phone, booking viewings, all the junior level stuff, really, all the entry level stuff. I mean, I was paid about 16 grand, which at the time felt like an absolute fortune to me, other than the fact that I'd been paid quite well for my pro debut. This was great, a regular income, month in, month out. That will do me fine. So I got a slightly nicer apartment before upgrading to a house that we was renting as well. So we had all these little milestones along the way. And with 18 months of starting the job in a estate agency, I just put my all into it. Like I did with everything that I'd ever done previously, I put my all into it. And I was really studying estate agency. I fell in love with it. Just like when I started boxing, I was studying the greats, and same in estate agency, I was studying who's out there, who's doing what well. So within 18 months, I've been promoted to branch manager. And again, the studying continued. I've always been big on improving myself, educating myself. Remember, you can't earn more until you learn more. So 18 months later of being made branch manager, we then won a national award. So we worked for a big brand. They were called Your Move. Your Move were the biggest estate agent in the country at the time. They're not anymore. We actually overtook them with a company that I worked with a little bit later on. But I worked with Your Move. We won this award. There was 300 branches, and we got voted the number one most improved business, which was pretty cool. And I started to feel like a businessman, even though it wasn't my business. So we won this award, and that really got me a lot of attention in the industry. And 18 months after winning the award, I was approached to become a director for a company called Yopa, which was the company that we founded and ended up overtaking Your Move. So that was pretty cool. Now, at that point, as a branch manager, I was earning about 40, 50 grand. Yeah, can you believe it? This kid who was happy with 15, 16. When I got approached to be director of Yopa, I was offered my first 6-figure salary with bonus, dividends, all that kind of fun stuff, and shares in the business. So for me, I felt like I'd really started to make some progress, and I was still really young at this point as well. I was still mid to late 20s. So I'd achieved so much more than I ever thought was possible, but I still had these ambitions. It was still always kind of hit a goal, set a new goal, hit a goal, set a new goal. And that's what took me to doing what I'm doing now. So I'd achieved a lot, but I always wanted to set up my own business. And funnily enough, we did a Find Your Why session. And one big thing, so I always say this as well, that whether it's good or bad, the big things that come to define us are usually planted, the small seeds that are planted and time compounded. So this small seed was planted of making a difference to 1 million people. That really, it just felt right to me. It just felt good. And often you'll find that most life coaches, most philanthropists, whether it be Tony Robbins, Bill Gates, all these kind of people, they've all been through some trauma in their life. Now, a lot of life coaches that aren't quite as successful as Tony Robbins, the reason they're a life coach is because they want to help because they've been through their own trauma. Now, some of them it's because they've not fixed themselves yet, and they think that fixing other people will help them. Where you see that a lot with counselors and therapists and that kind of stuff. My advice would be, if that's you, if you're a helper as well, if you've been through your own trauma, fix yourself first. You won't be able to fix other people properly until you've fixed yourself first. Always fix yourself first. Always fix the root of the problem. And that was me. I felt like I'd been on this personal development journey now. So when I decided to turn pro, I started doing a lot of personal development, especially once I'd kind of hit that rock bottom a few years earlier. And I've been really, again, just educating myself, reading books and books and books. I read the stat that the average CEO reads 50 books a year. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good place to start. But it wasn't long before I thought, well, actually, I don't want to be an average CEO. A great CEO would read 60, right? We've built that up now. I'm reading 100 books a year at the minute, 2 books a week. And I really always worked on that education. So I thought, right, how do we go and make a difference to 1 million people? You're not going to do that in a estate agency, James, because it's very transactional and no one actually is really very grateful. You're not changing anybody's life by helping them move house. So, and I was realizing I was having quite a small impact and I could do more. So I left the big salary, the big job to set up my own business. So I set up as a business consultant. At first, that was to estate agents, just because that was a bit of a comfort. Maybe that was a bit of a limiting belief. Maybe I didn't go for it enough there. But I also had this thing, well, actually, if I help the business owner and that will help all the employees in the business and maybe their families as well. And that's what that belief is what ultimately led me to business coaching. So I bought a franchise. I purchased my first franchise because I did Action Coach, the #1 franchise in the world. So I thought, right, let's learn from these guys. That's going to speed up my development by 10 or 15 years. Well worth the investment. So I invested 6 figures into buying my own franchise of my own money and really went for it. So that's led me to where I am now. The mission now is not 1 million people anymore. It's 1 billion. And there's a few things that we're doing to help people with that. We run a session every morning that's not business related. It's mindset related, called Master Your Morning, which you can find on Facebook. If you just literally go on Facebook and type in James Burke Action Coach, you'll find the page. Follow that page. You'll see us every single weekday morning, 7:45. That's a big one. So we're reaching about 10,000 people a day through that channel. That's really helping. Obviously, we're working with business owners as well to help them and help their lives, grow the business, change their life, all that kind of fun stuff. And the book is another. That was the biggest driver to release the book, was to share my story. So the first chapter is my story, which you've just heard. There's probably a little bit more detail in there. And the rest of the chapters, the other 17, 18 chapters in the book, are all how you can do it as well. So taking the lessons from my story and implementing, this is your how-to. Think of it as a how-to manual to achieve success, happiness, and pretty much everything that you've ever wanted. And I think the biggest thing is, another big tip would be for when people are going through difficulties, when people are having challenges, whether it's you or someone that you know and love, don't collude with them. The worst thing that was happening to me through the period of when I slipped into depression and when I was suicidal, after the boxing, after Baz had passed away and my nan had passed away, and I was still dealing with a lot of head trash from being homeless. This kept happening to me. People kept saying, well, it's no wonder you're depressed, everything that you've been through. And they were colluding with me. And the worst thing about that was I was getting secondary gains from it. So why do people stay in crisis? For me, that was 5 years of hell. Why the hell would you stay there for 5 years? And because it was reinforced and I was getting those secondary gains, that sympathy, all that kind of stuff. So my biggest lesson would be, especially if you're trying to help someone else, challenge them. Don't collude with them. Challenge is the only way forward. Challenge creates change. So that pretty much wraps up my story. Lucy, if you want to jump back in.
Wow, James, thank you so much. I've been through every emotion with you in the last sort of 25 minutes. So thank you for being so honest and sharing that with us. And just to sort of reinforce, I have this book. I've learned a hell of a lot from it. It's more than a book, really. It's like a practical guide, and it gets you thinking, so you kind of set your own goals throughout it. I would thoroughly recommend it, and we will send the link to the book for anyone that wants to purchase it, to everybody that's here this morning. So yeah, full recommendation from me. We've got some great questions, James, which I'm sure you're going to love. So I'll make a start on them. Okay. Have you any other inspiration in your life?
Present?
Don't say me.
other than you, Lucy, is that at present?
It doesn't say, but I'm gonna say yes. And then if the person that's wrote the question, 'cause it's anonymous, if they want to add to that, then they can. But yeah, any inspiration right now?
Yeah, absolutely. As is most people, my children, so I've Matthew and Lily. So I suppose that the challenges never stop. So last year in May, my daughter Lily was born 10 weeks early, and she was born in Palma she was born in Ibiza while we was on holiday. So we'd gone and got the fit to fly letter. We'd booked the holiday before she was conceived, and got the fit to fly letters, got the okay from the doctors, went out on holiday to Ibiza. First day we was there, she was born 10 weeks early. She weighed 3 pounds, so we was terrified. We was in a foreign country. Nurses, doctors didn't speak English. I speak a little Spanish, but fuck all, which means a little bit. And that was a really, really challenging time. So, but Lily's happy, she's healthy. There's no health issues or anything like that. So they're my two big inspirations. But I suppose that's probably another little side learning is the challenges never stop. You just get better at dealing with them. And like I said, expect obstacles, because obstacles will come. So literally yesterday, one of my friends passed away with suicide, funnily enough. So, about 6 weeks ago, another one of my friends passed away. My oldest friend, actually, who I grew up on the council estate with, he fell off a motorbike. So the challenges, the obstacles never stop. You just get a hell of a lot better at dealing with them. And remember, everything that you deal with is a choice. So my inspiration would absolutely be my two children. They're a big driver for me, as they are for the majority of people. But the biggest thing for me is, so I do this priming exercise every day. And this priming exercise is just what I do to start my day in the best way. A couple of breathing exercises in there, gratitude, like a visualization technique. And every single time that I do that, every single day, 7 days a week, I just get this feeling of euphoria, and it's a really joyous feeling. So I have this joy and this passion and this love for life. And that, for me, the reason we went from 1 million to 1 billion is, other than my coach challenging me for setting my sights too low, was that if I can help other people get this feeling that I've got for life and share that with 1 billion people, what a life that is worth living. So that's my biggest driver. And when I see pain and when I see things that, like what happened yesterday with Tom, my friend, that kills me a little bit, but it also just makes me work even harder.
Thanks, James. Wow, I'm sorry to hear that. And it sort of brings us on to the next question, really. How do you stay so motivated and so driven?
I think it's conditioning. So I get asked that question a lot. Do you never, we've never seen you angry, frustrated, sad, or anything like that, really. But I do still get all those feelings. It's just that I choose not to stay there. So again, it just comes back to your thoughts become things. Everything's a choice. And conditioning. So again, part of my daily routine, 40 minutes in the morning, is conditioning myself to have that energy. And there's it's very deliberate. So for me, I can't speak for other people with super high energy, but for me, it's very deliberate. So what I eat, what I drink, what I let go inside here, it's all very deliberate to make sure that I'm performing at peak performance. I've become quite obsessed with that over the last 5 years, and maintaining my energy. So I don't tend to drink caffeine, alcohol, all that kind of stuff, because, well, quite frankly, I'm a bit of a girl with a hangover. So
Bit of a girl.
Oh yeah, I'm terrible with the hangover.
Not happy about this language, James.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my bad. I'm a bit soft with the hangover.
Thank you. It's better. Another question. Somebody's just Googled James Burke. Are you related to James Burke, the 19th century heavyweight champion, or is that just a coincidence?
That's a coincidence. I didn't even realise that. As a boxing historian, I should have known that. So,
wow. I think you should have said yes.
That would have been pretty cool, though, right?
Yeah, it would. What's the biggest challenge in your new career?
Oh, biggest challenge in my new career? That is a very, very good question. That's really difficult. I feel like there's not that many challenges. I think the biggest challenge when I first started doing what I'm doing now was taking home other people's stories. So, for example, if someone else is having a hard time, that would be on my mind. I would go home, that would be on my mind. Again, so I read about 4 books in a row on how to make sure you don't take that home. And the one line that hit me was from my favorite business philosopher, Jim Rohn. And Jim talks about coaching, and he says, one thing that you've got to remember is it's their journey, not yours, through the good and the bad. So that was the biggest challenge. I don't struggle with that challenge anymore. What would be the biggest challenge right now? The biggest challenge right now would be seeing people in pain, knowing we can help, and not being able to help, or not help, not being able, but not helping at the minute, not helping at present. So that's why we've launched a lot of stuff that we can do for free to help people, or for very cheap that we can do to help people. So I think that would be the biggest challenge right now.
Okay, thank you. Did the pressure to be at a certain point or status in your life at that time become a factor? So I think this is in relation to your sort of build up to suicide. I'm presuming anyway, the person that's wrote this, tell me if I'm wrong. But yeah, was that the pressure to be at that status with the sort of pro boxing and everything? Did that become a factor?
I think it definitely did become a factor. That's a very good question, actually. And it goes back to what I was saying about the blueprint. My blueprint, and I'd lived this blueprint and visualized this blueprint from being 12 years old up until my pro debut at 19, 20, was to be world champ. So then when that blueprint got derailed, I genuinely didn't feel like this council estate lad. I had a lot of limiting beliefs that have long since been banished. They're banned now, limiting beliefs. But I had a lot of limiting beliefs about what a lad from a council estate can do. Despite almost every super success story having almost a very similar theme to it, right? Everyone that you can think of that's super successful had hardships at some point. And if anything, they probably helped the journey, not hindered it. But I certainly had a lot of limiting beliefs. So it was kind of, when my career was derailed, it was, well, what am I going to do now? This is it. I'm going to end up, just like everybody else on the council estate. So, to answer the question, it definitely did have a big impact.
Okay, and that leads us quite nicely into the next question. Do the things you learned from boxing influence the way you do things in your career now?
The biggest thing that I learned from boxing that influences me now is one of the leading attributes in my mind for success: consistency and discipline. I cannot stress enough that if you do all these great things that we talk about, everything that's in the book, everything that in your business, even if, let's say, you're growing your business, you're doing your marketing, you're doing your sales, but you do it once, it's not going to make a difference. It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym once, you might have the best session in the world, you might love it. If you never go again, it's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. You've got to go to the gym every single day, even when you don't feel like it, and even when you don't perform that well. Even if you go to the gym and you have a bit of a rubbish day, at least there's some benefit there. It's the consistency that counts. So that's the biggest lesson, like consistency, especially in boxing. The consistency is so important. You've got to train every day, twice a day when I turned professional, and when I was boxing on the squads. You've got to be training twice a day. So it's that consistency. You can't really afford to miss days or be in and out of the gym. The amount of super talented lads, way more talented than I was, that I've seen fail and fail big. They went on to win the national championships, and some of them boxed in the Olympics, but they never went further or never made a successful and happy life because they were too busy messing around with other things. They were in and out of the gym and that kind of stuff. So we've seen the example with Tyson Fury, greatest heavyweight on the planet. And that lack of consistency in the middle of his career, once he won the title from Klitschko, really caused him some trouble. So consistency, discipline, obviously a really big part of boxing, and discipline is the glue that holds consistency to your habits. So yeah, they would be the two biggest attributes.
So the one salad is not going to do a lot for me, is it?
One salad's not going to do too much. No.
Okay, thanks, James, for ruining my day. Comment from Poppy, not a question, but a comment. Really great, honest talk, and I really like the comment, thoughts become things, 100%.
Thanks, Poppy. Yeah, so there's a book by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich, and the book's maybe 100 years old. It's like a real personal development classic. It's quite a lengthy book, actually, but that's where this philosophy really came to fruition. In the mainstream anyway, it's been there. There's a lot of scribes and philosophers way back in the past, Confucius, even in the Bible, to be fair. But that's where that really materializes. Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. That's a great book as well. So yeah, absolutely, thoughts become things. Just be the coolest exercise you can do is jot down at the end of the day, what have I thought about most today? Because whatever you've thought about most today is that I'll be able to tell the future what your life's going to look like in the next 90 days, year, 5 years. Because wherever you're thinking about most is where you're going. So just choose to think positive.
Love it, thank you. Have you any advice for your younger self and people in a similar position to where you were in the past? Great question.
So much advice. To be honest, it's pretty much everything that I'm doing now would be the advice. So everything that's in the book, everything that we talk about on Master Your Morning every day, all the advice that we give business owners that we work with, I practice all of it. Like every single thing that I'm talking about, I practice it now. So it would literally be everything that I'm doing now, I would give the advice to my younger self. So the beauty is I've got a version of my younger self, because Matthew is like an extended better version of me. So I also get to help him along his journey, which is pretty cool. So he's 7 next month. He's 7 on September 29th. And he does his visualizations every day. So he visualizes himself doing his goals. He does his affirmations, of which he's chose himself. And one of them is I'm going to be a scientist. So he's got his goals, and he's got his goals up on his wall as well. 2 of those presents that we're going to get him for his birthday. So making sure they materialize. So there's lots of little things like that. Consistency and discipline comes down to it. Always got to do those things regularly for it to work. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot of tips there. Like I said, pretty much everything that we share. So they would be my big ones.
And don't get the jaw hits. Probably would be one as well.
Yeah, if you're gonna throw a jab to body, make sure your right hand's high.
Yeah, 100%. What do you think made you make the decision not to go through with it? And I think this is referring to the suicide attempt.
What made the decision? So running through my head at that point was the pain that I'd leave behind. So I thought, who the hell's going to pay for my funeral? My mum had absolutely no money. That was one of the biggest drivers, because although I still wasn't speaking to my mum at the time, I do now. We get on great now, and I get on great with my dad since I started taking ownership for all the stuff that I'd done when I was younger. But that was a really big thought for me, all the pain that I was going to leave behind. And that's still a motivator now, actually. Whenever I'm making a decision, it's if it's going to leave pain behind, that's always present, something that I always think about. So I would suggest that would be the thing that stopped me doing. And to be honest as well, fear. Yeah. I've always been scared of dying. So I think that probably relates to why I've always felt of Baz and Tom yesterday. I've always just thought, how brave do you have to be to do that? It's the fear of the unknown, not knowing what's on the other side, that's always terrified me as well. So I'd probably say those 2 things. Yeah,
I'm with you with that. Thanks, James. What things do you learn from the people that you work with?
So much. So we've got a team now, a team of 4 girls. So maybe going back to my childhood, being surrounded by 7 sisters, and they're all so different. So they've all got different backgrounds. They've all got different learnings. So I learn a lot from the team that we work with, but also then the clients that we work with, the business owners that we work with. I learn something new every single session. People are, well, I suppose the biggest learning would be, no matter the transactional thing that you're going through, it's all underpinned by emotion and mindset. So for example, if a business owner is trying to grow their business, and the transactional thing might be, right, we need more leads, so we're going to look at lead generation strategies. If that's working, it's usually working because something that's triggered in their mindset, whether that's they've been obsessed with education, right, I'm going to read 3 books on marketing, and that's really helped them. And if it's not working, again, there's usually something that's holding them back between their ears, some form of head trash, whether it might be head trash, it might be fear, it might be a limiting belief, whatever it might be. So that's the biggest thing, is always trying to find what's really holding people back. And you know, the interesting thing is, since I've been sharing my story, because I didn't share my story for a very, very long time, it's only these last couple of years really as it's come into the spotlight and with the media and things like that. The biggest thing since I started telling my story that I realized is everyone's got a story. Everybody on this planet has got a story. Some share it, some don't, but everybody has got one. And so there's 2 things to take from that really. Is 1, understand that when you're dealing with other people, and be empathetic, not sympathetic, because that's just colluding and giving second gains. And And the second big learning, if number one is understanding that and having that empathy, the second big learning is everyone can bounce back from it as well. Everyone can and will bounce back from it. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, James. That's great. Okay, we've got a last and final question, which I think I'm pretty 99.9% certain I know your answer to this. And if you don't have the answer, I think we might fall out. So it's saying it's not talk related, but Tyson versus AJ, who wins? Who wins?
So
easy question, easy answer.
I don't predict boxing matches anymore. So I gave a lot of predictions actually about COVID, what was going to happen through COVID. Every single one of them was wrong. And although I was pretty good with my boxing predictions, I've seen a lot of people made to look a fool on the back of boxing predictions. So I don't tend to make them. I know Lucy's going to go crazy if I don't say one. So what I would say is, you've got to think Tyson Fury would win every round of the fight. He's a much better boxer unless he gets hurt. AJ's got some serious power. Tyson's chin, although he can get up, he does get put down quite regularly. So what I would say is that would be a really intriguing fight. You've got to think Tyson's winning the rounds. As long as he stays out of trouble, he should win. But he also always shown what he did to Wilder in his last fight. He can certainly hurt AJ as well, because his chin's not the best. So I wouldn't necessarily say it would only be if Tyson was going to win, it would only be on points. I think he can stop AJ. I think if AJ is going to win, he can only win by stoppage.
Yeah, and I think for me, obviously, we've spoke about this before, but I am a Tyson Fury fan. Not just because of, and probably more so not just because of what he's done in the ring and how much he's been written off, but because of the biggest battle he's ever had is in his own head, and he's overcome that. So for me, everything else to him is now easy. And I'm also, I find AJ's not got the biggest personality. So Tyson Fury for me.
No one's going to pose Tyson Fury a bigger problem than he posed himself. So he's overcome the biggest demon that he'll ever overcome. From that point on, boxing is what he does. He's done it. So I had the privilege of boxing on the same show as Tyson Fury. Sadly, he lost actually to David Price back in the amateurs. But he's been boxing for a long time. So boxing for him is similar to how it was for me at the end of my career. It was fun, and then you start to see it as a job. Actually, it's just like going to work for everybody else. So there will be no fear on his part. There will be no overwhelming anxiety compared to everything that he's been through in and out of the ring. To be honest, he's not going to be overwhelmingly worried about that, I don't think. No,
we will see. But yeah, my boxing predictions are usually pretty good. So Tyson Fury, if anybody wants to make some money, that's my prediction.
And you've recorded this as well. So
I've recorded, exactly. So, and if anybody sees Tyson, if they let him know, this is what, standing by this. I saw him at his worst. I bumped into him at his worst, at his heaviest. And then saw him just as he'd done, he sort of come back in his first fight and looked completely different because of the size difference in the weight loss. And I said to him then, you're going to be world champ again. And he went, that's the plan. So that's the plan. And he's training very hard. So talking about him like he's my best mate, but there's still time for that. Reading his autobiography at the minute, which is great as well. So yeah, what a guy. James, sincerely thank you. You've been so open and honest. Hopefully everybody's going to leave today feeling so much better than when they arrived. That's always what we say about a LearnBox Lounge. I'm 100% sure they will do. A whole roller coaster of emotions, but really, really good points there about mindset, about thoughts becoming, things and all that kind of thing. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else has as well. Thank you for giving your time. I really appreciate it. To everybody that's joined this morning, thank you for joining us. You will have a feedback form in your inbox. Please complete it because it can only help us improve and get better. And as I mentioned before, if you want a discovery call to find out more about what we do or how we can help you, more than happy to help. Feel free to sort of like, share, promote on social media as well. We won't stop you. We'll appreciate it. So thank you. We're also going to send out the link. It should be in your inbox now, a link for James's book. I can't recommend it enough. It's been a big game changer for me personally. So again, can't recommend it enough. And just to let you know, obviously everybody will be on our mailing list, so you will receive things from us. We've got something exciting going on behind the scenes. There is a link to what we've talked about this morning. I can't say too much about it at the moment, but there is going to be a launch on the 10th of September. It's something really, really exciting. So please keep your eyes peeled, and hopefully you can join us on that day as well, because it's going to be big. So thank you. Thanks again, James. That was amazing. So thank you for your time, and thanks everybody for joining us. Take care.